Story number 1. Whispers on Black Crow Field. I've always been drawn to the fringes of human experience, the places where reality bends and legends take root. The Bridgewater Triangle, with its dense forests and eerie silence, has long been a magnet for those seeking answers to the unexplained. It was December 2010 when a group of friends and I decided to explore Black Crow Field, a secluded expanse on the edge of this enigmatic region. What we found that night would haunt us forever. The journey to Black Crow Field wasn't straightforward. We hiked for hours through thick underbrush, the snow crunching under our boots and the biting cold seeping into our bones. Our group consisted of 5: Mark, the de facto leader with an insatiable curiosity; Lisa, whose skepticism often kept us grounded; Emma, the quiet observer with a knack for photography; Tom, the joker who lightened our tense moments; and me, always the storyteller, eager to document our adventures. As dusk began to settle, we reached the heart of the field. The landscape was surreal, blanketed in pristine snow that reflected the fading light of the setting sun. Towering pines surrounded us, their branches heavy with ice, creating a natural barrier that isolated us from the outside world. In the center of the field stood an old stone structure, partially buried in snow, a relic from a bygone era, perhaps once used for gatherings or ceremonies. "Let's set up camp here," Mark suggested, pointing to a relatively clear area near the stone. We unpacked our gear, the warmth of our tents a welcome contrast to the frigid air. As night fell, we gathered around a small fire, its flames flickering against the darkness, casting long shadows that danced among the trees. "We should document everything," Emma said, setting up her camera. "If anything happens, we have evidence." Lisa rolled her eyes but didn't object. "We're just out here to enjoy the wilderness, not hunt for ghosts." Mark chuckled, trying to ease the tension. "Come on, Lisa, it's Bridgewater Triangle. Who knows what we might encounter?" As the night deepened, an uneasy silence settled over us, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of wildlife. It was then that we began to hear it, a soft, rhythmic chanting that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath us. At first, we dismissed it as the wind playing tricks, but the chanting grew louder, more deliberate. "What is that?" Tom asked, his usual bravado replaced by genuine concern. "I don't know," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "But it sounds like a ritual." Mark stood up, squinting into the darkness. "Let's check it out. Maybe it's just some locals having a late-night gathering." We grabbed our flashlights and cautiously approached the stone structure. The chanting intensified, echoing off the snow-covered ground and creating an almost hypnotic effect. As we neared the center, we saw figures cloaked in black robes moving in a circle around a makeshift altar. Their faces were obscured by hoods, and the only thing visible was the glint of something metallic, perhaps ceremonial daggers or tools. Emma began to snap photos, her hands trembling slightly. "This is incredible," she breathed. "We need to get closer." Lisa hesitated, pulling me back. "Maybe we should leave. This feels wrong." But Mark was already moving forward, drawn by an inexplicable force. "We came here for adventure. Let's see what's happening." As we stepped into the circle, the chanting ceased abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed down on us. The figures turned towards us, their movements slow and deliberate. One of them stepped forward, raising a hand in a gesture that signaled us to stay back. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and the scent of something acrid filled our nostrils. I noticed dark stains on the altar, traces of blood, thick and dry, seeping into the snow. My heart raced as fear took hold. "What are you doing here?" the robed figure demanded, his voice deep and resonant despite the hood covering his face. Mark tried to respond, but his words faltered. "We didn't mean any harm. We're just here to explore." The figure seemed to assess us, his gaze piercing through the darkness. "This is sacred ground. he said sternly. Leave now, or face the consequences. Before we could react, the chanting resumed, louder and more intense. The figures began to move again, their motions synchronized and precise. The ground beneath us seemed to pulse with energy, the snow swirling into patterns that mirrored the movements of the ritual. Lisa grabbed my arm, pulling me back. We need to go. Now. As we turned to leave, one of the robed figures lunged forward, brandishing a dagger that glinted ominously in the firelight. Panic surged through us as we ran, the chanting and the sounds of pursuit growing louder. The snow made every step treacherous, but adrenaline pushed us forward, desperate to escape the nightmarish scene. We stumbled through the forest, the sounds of the chanting fading behind us, replaced by the howling wind and our own ragged breaths. Mark led the way, his confidence wavering as fear took over. We didn't stop until we reached the edge of the field, the first light of dawn beginning to break the horizon. Breathless and shaken, we huddled together, the reality of what we had witnessed sinking in. We need to report this, Lisa said, her voice trembling, but Mark shook his head, a haunted look in his eyes. No one would believe us. It's better if we just forget it ever happened. We packed up our gear in silence, the weight of the night's events heavy on our shoulders. As we left Bridgewater Triangle behind, the legends of Black Crow Field no longer seemed like mere stories. They were a chilling reality that we had become a part of. Back in town, life returned to normal, but the memory of that night lingered. Emma's photos captured the eerie figures and the bloodstains, but viewing them only brought back the fear we had felt. Conversations became strained, the unspoken knowledge of what we had encountered creating a barrier between us. Months passed, but the haunting memories never faded. I often found myself staring out the window on cold December nights, the echoes of the chanting still reverberating in my mind. Sleep eluded me, replaced by vivid nightmares of robed figures and the chilling presence of the faceless man. Determined to find closure, I delved deeper into the history of Black Crow Field. What I discovered was a tragic story of the Wampanoag people, the original inhabitants of the land. Decades ago, they had performed rituals to honor their ancestors and protect their sacred grounds. But as settlers encroached upon their territory, tensions rose, leading to violent confrontations and broken promises. The bloodstains we had seen were remnants of those ancient rituals, attempts to appease spirits and maintain a fragile balance between the living and the dead. The chanting was not malicious but a desperate plea for respect and remembrance, twisted by centuries of resentment and loss. Realizing the depth of the tragedy, I reached out to local historians and Wampanoag descendants, seeking to understand and honor their heritage. Together, we organized a memorial at Black Crow Field, a gesture of reconciliation and respect for the land and its people. On the anniversary of our encounter, we returned to the field, the cold December air wrapping around us like a solemn vow. We lit candles and offered prayers, the flickering flames a symbol of our commitment to remember and honor the past. As the night settled, a familiar chanting began, softer and more harmonious. The robed figures appeared once more, their presence no longer threatening but respectful. The air filled with a sense of peace, the oppressive energy lifting as the spirits found solace in our acknowledgement. The faceless man approached, his red eyes now glowing with gratitude rather than menace. He extended a hand, a gesture of thanks before fading into the night, the echoes of the chanting a final farewell. In that moment, I felt a profound connection to the land and its history, a reminder that some stories are not meant to be forgotten. The Bridgewater Triangle remained a place of mystery, but now it stood as a testament to the power of remembrance and the enduring spirit of those who came before us. Years later, Black Crow Field remains a symbol of unity and respect, a place where the past and present coexist in harmony. The legends continue, but they are now stories of healing and understanding, whispered among the rustling ferns and the silent snow. And sometimes, on the coldest December nights, When the wind carries the faintest echoes of chanting and the snow blankets the earth in quiet stillness, I catch a glimpse of the robed figures, standing guard over their sacred grounds, a perpetual reminder that some bonds transcend time and that every soul deserves to be remembered and honored. Story number 2. Orbs over Bridgewater Marsh. I've always been a skeptic. The Bridgewater Triangle, with its dense forests and eerie marshlands, has long been a hotspot for paranormal enthusiasts and thrill-seekers. As someone who thrived on logic and reason, I never paid much attention to the legends surrounding this enigmatic region. That is, until December 1997 changed everything. It was a biting cold December night, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes every breath a visible struggle. I was driving back from a late shift at the local diner, my mind preoccupied with thoughts of paychecks and everyday mundanities. The road ahead was shrouded in darkness, the only illumination coming from the weak beams of my headlights cutting through the night. Bridgewater Marsh lay to my left, a vast expanse of waterlogged land fringed by towering pines and shrouded in mystery. Over the years, I'd heard stories about strange lights dancing over the marsh, orbs of red, green, and white moving with impossible speed, disappearing and reappearing in the blink of an eye. Most dismissed these tales as mere folklore or the product of overactive imaginations fueled by isolation and the eerie silence of the marsh. But that night, something compelled me to take a detour. Maybe it was the haunting beauty of the marsh under the moonlight, or perhaps the nagging curiosity that refused to be silenced. Whatever the reason, I found myself veering off the main road and onto a narrow path that led deep into the heart of Bridgewater Marsh. The air was thick with mist, the snow-covered ground muffling my footsteps as I drove deeper into the marshland. My headlights struggled against the fog, creating ghostly shadows that danced among the reeds and waterlogged grasses. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant calls of nocturnal creatures and the soft lapping of water against the shoreline. As I navigated the winding path, my car's heater worked overtime, battling the relentless cold. My thoughts drifted back to the stories I'd heard, of orbs that hovered above the marsh, their colors vivid against the dark backdrop, moving in ways that defied natural explanation. Most of the tales ended with the observers fleeing in terror, unable to comprehend the spectacle before them. Suddenly, my headlights caught a flicker of movement to my left. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of moonlight on the water, but as I focused, I saw them bright orbs of red, green, and white, floating just above the marsh. They moved with an unnatural speed, darting across the water and weaving between the trees like sentient beings. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowed down, mesmerized by the display. The orbs seemed almost playful, dancing and spiraling in patterns that were both mesmerizing and unsettling. I reached for my phone, intending to capture the phenomenon, but as I glanced down, I realized my phone was dead. Frustration bubbled up inside me, but I was too captivated to care. I continued to watch as the orbs multiplied, their movements becoming more erratic and intense. Red orbs chased green ones, colliding and bouncing off each other with a force that seemed impossible. White orbs floated serenely, unaffected by the chaos around them. The colors were so vibrant against the dark marsh that they seemed almost otherworldly, like something out of a nightmare. Suddenly, the ground beneath me began to tremble, the car vibrating as if something massive was stirring beneath the marsh. I glanced around, trying to make sense of the situation, but the fog and darkness provided no answers. The orbs continued their frenzied dance, but now they moved with a purpose, heading towards the center of the marsh where the trees grew denser and the water deeper. Without warning, the largest red orb accelerated towards me, the speed unnaturally swift. I slammed on the brakes, heart racing, as the orb shot past the side of my car, leaving a trail of sparks and mist in its wake. The sudden impact threw me back into my seat, the car's interior rattling violently. I fumbled with the steering wheel, trying to regain control, but the road ahead was obscured by the swirling snow and relentless mist. The car skidded to a halt, the engine sputtering and dying as I stared in disbelief at the chaos unfolding around me. The orbs were everywhere now, a swirling maelstrom of colors that seemed to merge into a single, pulsating entity. The temperature dropped even further, my breath forming thick clouds in the frigid air. The oppressive silence returned, the only sound the soft hum of the dying engine and the distant howling wind. I tried to start the car again, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped in the heart of the Bridgewater Marsh, surrounded by the inexplicable and the supernatural. The orbs began to coalesce, forming a massive, glowing sphere that hovered above the marsh, casting an intense light that illuminated the entire area. A voice, soft and echoing, filled the air, resonating from all directions at once. "Welcome to our realm." I bolted the doors, scrambling to put on my seatbelt, but it was too late. The sphere descended rapidly, the light overwhelming, blinding me as it enveloped the car. I felt a surge of energy, a force pulling me out of my body, dragging me into the vortex of light and color. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the car but standing in a vast, ethereal landscape. The sky was a swirling canvas of red, green, and white, the colors blending and shifting in impossible ways. The air was thick with the hum of energy, the ground beneath my feet soft and misty. Before me stood the orbs once more, now taking on a more defined shape. They were humanoid, their bodies composed entirely of light, their faces blank and featureless. They moved gracefully, their movements synchronized with the rhythm of the colors that surrounded them. One of them approached me, extending a hand that glowed with an intense white light. I reached out hesitantly, feeling the warmth and energy radiating from their form. As our hands touched, visions flooded my mind, memories not my own. A history of the Bridgewater Marsh and the spirits that guarded its secrets. I saw the land before it was tainted by human encroachment, pristine and untouched, home to the Wampanoag people who revered it as sacred. The orbs were the spirits of the land, guardians of its sanctity, bound to the marsh by a curse that had been placed upon them centuries ago. The curse was a result of broken promises and unspoken agreements, a pact that ensured the marsh remained untouched and the spirits remained in balance with nature. But as time passed, the land was exploited, the marsh drained and polluted, causing the spirits to become restless and vengeful. The visions shifted, showing the suffering of the land and the anger of the spirits, culminating in the appearance of the orbs, manifestations of their pain and frustration. The orbs had become a warning, a reminder of the delicate balance that must be maintained to coexist with the supernatural forces that inhabited the Bridgewater Triangle. As the visions faded, the orbs gathered around me, their collective presence overwhelming yet strangely comforting. "Protect the land." Their voices echoed in my mind. "Respect the balance." I felt a sense of purpose wash over me, a mission to honor the spirits and ensure that the Bridgewater Marsh remained a sanctuary for both nature and the supernatural. The orbs began to dissolve, their light merging with the swirling sky, leaving me standing alone in the ethereal landscape. When I awoke, I was back in my car, the storm outside having subsided. The snow was still falling, but the oppressive cold had lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and resolve. I started the engine, which roared to life as if nothing had happened, driving away from the marsh. I couldn't shake the memories of the nightmarish encounter, the orbs and their haunting plea echoing in my mind. In the weeks that followed, I became a vocal advocate for the preservation of Bridgewater Marsh. I spoke at town meetings, raising awareness about the legends and the need to protect the land from further exploitation. My experience changed me, turning my skepticism into a deep respect for the unknown and the supernatural forces that coexist with our reality. The Bridgewater Marsh remains a place of mystery, the strange lights still appearing on cold December nights, a reminder of the delicate balance that must be maintained. And sometimes, when the snow falls just right and the moonlight casts a perfect glow over the marsh. I catch a glimpse of red, green, and white orbs moving gracefully through the night, a silent testament to the spirits that guard their sacred home. Story number 3. Faceless on Raynham Road. I've always been a night owl, finding solace in the quiet hours when the world slows down and the city's relentless pace gives way to silence. Being a taxi driver in the Bridgewater Triangle wasn't just a job. It was an exploration of the unknown, a chance to witness the peculiarities that locals whispered about in hushed tones. But nothing could have prepared me for the night I encountered the faceless man on Raynham Road, a night that blurred the line between reality and nightmare. It was December 2002, a month when the cold wrapped around you like a heavy blanket, seeping into your bones and chilling you to the core. Bridgewater Triangle had always been a place of mystery, its dense forests and desolate roads breeding countless legends of the supernatural. As a taxi driver, I navigated its winding streets with a mix of familiarity and trepidation, knowing that each ride could bring an encounter with the unexplainable. That night, the snow was falling steadily, blanketing the streets in a pristine layer of white. The temperature had plummeted earlier in the evening, making the wind bite through even the thickest of coats. My taxi was my sanctuary, the heater working overtime to keep the chill at bay as I drove through the quiet neighborhoods of Bridgewater. Around midnight, I received a call from a passenger near Raynham Road, a secluded stretch notorious for its eerie stillness. The ride was short, just a few blocks to a small, dimly lit house at the edge of town. As I approached, the headlights of my taxi pierced through the falling snow, revealing a lone figure standing by the roadside. He was tall, his frame hunched against the cold. I slowed down, pulling over to the side of the road. The man motioned for me to stop, his hands trembling as he reached out to open the door. There was something unsettling about him, something that made my skin crawl despite the warm interior of my car. I turned off the meter and waited, watching as he shuffled closer, the snowflakes clinging to his coat. As he stepped into the taxi, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter night outside. He took a seat in the back, pulling his coat tighter around himself. "Where to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared straight ahead, his eyes blank and devoid of any emotion. I glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of his face, or rather, the lack of it. His face was smooth, completely featureless, like a mannequin without any defining traits. My heart raced, and I fought the urge to glance back again. But my curiosity got the better of me. "Are you all right?" I ventured cautiously. Still, he remained silent, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. I reached out to take his fare, but his hand was icy cold, sending a shiver down my spine. The atmosphere inside the taxi grew heavy, the warmth of the heater unable to dispel the growing sense of unease. As I began to drive, the radio crackled to life with a routine update from dispatch. I tuned it out, focusing instead on the road and the mysterious passenger in my backseat. The snow continued to fall, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the relentless barrage of flakes. Suddenly, the man leaned forward, his voice a hollow whisper that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. "They're coming." I jerked the steering wheel, swerving slightly to avoid hitting a snowbank. "Who's coming?" I demanded, my voice quivering despite my attempts to stay calm. He didn't respond. Instead, the temperature in the cabin dropped further, the breath inside turning visible as frost began to form on the windows. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows that danced across the interior of the taxi. I tried to focus on the road, but the feeling of being watched intensified, wrapping around me like an invisible grip. The car began to pick up speed on Raynham Road, the road seeming to stretch endlessly into the night. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what was happening. Maybe he was experiencing a panic attack, or perhaps the cold had gotten to him. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the rearview mirror, another figure standing by the roadside, just like him. I glanced back, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. The snow had obscured any clear view, leaving only vague shapes and shadows. The silence was deafening, broken only by the howling wind and the soft hum of the engine. "Please, help us," the man whispered again, his voice carrying an unearthly sadness. I pulled over, fumbling with the keys as I tried to make sense of his words. The engine died, and the car fell silent, save for the relentless storm outside. The man in the back seat stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. I watched in horror as he approached the front, his faceless visage sending chills down my spine. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the storm. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out, his hands pressing against the windshield as if trying to break through the barrier between us. The temperature dropped even further, and I could see my breath forming icy patterns in the air. The lights of the taxi dimmed, and the shadows seemed to stretch out, engulfing the car in darkness. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the man vanished, leaving me alone in the frozen silence. The temperature began to rise again, the frost melting away as if nothing had happened. My heart raced, and I struggled to regain control, both of the car and my racing thoughts. I started the engine and began to drive. The road ahead shrouded in darkness and snow. The encounter left me shaken, my skepticism shattered by the inexplicable events of that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed something beyond human comprehension, something that defied all logic and reason. The rest of the night passed in a blur of restless driving, the image of the faceless man haunting my thoughts. By dawn, I reached the safety of the town, the first rays of sunlight breaking through the storm clouds. Exhausted and still trembling, I decided then and there that I couldn't continue driving in the Bridgewater Triangle. The fear that had taken root in me that night was too deep, too persistent to ignore. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself unable to talk about what had happened. The memory of the faceless man on Raynham Road lingered, constant shadow in my mind. I sought solace in the company of friends and family, but their reassurances couldn't dispel the lingering dread that had settled over me. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved into the local legends and historical records of the Bridgewater Triangle. What I discovered was a chilling tale of a man named Samuel Hockamock, a kind-hearted soul who had lost his family to a tragic accident on Raynham Road decades earlier. The official records showed no signs of foul play, just a family devastated by loss and a community struggling to move forward. But whispers among the townsfolk told a different story, one of a restless spirit seeking closure, a soul trapped between the living and the dead. According to the legends, Samuel had been a taxi driver himself, dedicating his life to helping others navigate the treacherous roads of the Triangle. One fateful night, a violent storm had swept through, and Samuel had never returned from a particularly dangerous ride. His car was found abandoned, half buried in snow, with no trace of him or his passengers. Over the years, sightings of a faceless man on Raynham Road became more frequent, his presence a chilling reminder of the tragedy that had occurred. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to confront my fear head-on. I returned to Raynham Road one cold December night, the same time of year when the legends seemed to come alive. This time, I wasn't alone. I brought along a few trusted friends, determined to document any paranormal activity and, perhaps, offer some form of closure to the restless spirit of Samuel Hockamock. As we approached the deserted stretch of road, the snow began to fall heavier, the storm returning with a vengeance. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the howling wind and the crunch of our boots on the snow. We set up our equipment near the spot where I had encountered the faceless man, the memory of that night fueling our determination. Hours passed in uneasy silence, the storm raging around us. Then, just as we were about to give up and leave, we saw it, a figure standing by the roadside, just like before. He was tall, his coat billowing in the wind, his faceless visage a haunting reminder of our previous encounter. The temperature dropped further, and the air grew heavy with an oppressive presence. "Is anyone here?" I called out, my voice wavering slightly. The figure didn't respond. Instead, he began to move towards us, his movements slow and deliberate. The howling wind seemed to carry his sorrowful cries, a desperate plea for help that echoed through the night air. My friends and I exchanged fearful glances, but our resolve kept us rooted to the spot. As he approached, the temperature plummeted, the snow swirling around him like a spectral cloak. He reached out, his hands pressing against the invisible barrier between us. The lights on our equipment flickered, and the shadows danced ominously across the snow-covered ground. "Please," he whispered, his voice a haunting melody that resonated deep within me. "Help me find peace." I stepped forward, my fear overridden by a profound sense of empathy. "What do you need? How can we help you?" The figure's presence seemed to intensify, the air thick with his sorrow and despair. I reached out, placing a hand on the cold metal of my camera, trying to offer comfort through a tangible gesture. "Tell us what happened. We want to help." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the snow began to swirl more violently, the wind picking up as if responding to our plea. The figure started to fade, his form dissolving into the stormy night, leaving behind only the lingering echoes of his sorrowful cries. As he vanished, the oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a serene stillness that enveloped us. The storm began to subside, the snowflakes falling gently once more. We stood there in silence, the weight of the encounter settling over us like the soft blanket of snow. In the days that followed, the memory of that night remained etched in our minds, a testament to the thin veil that separates the living from the dead. We had offered a small measure of peace to a restless spirit, but the experience left us forever changed. The legends of the Bridgewater Triangle were no longer just stories. They were truths waiting to be uncovered, secrets that lingered in the shadows of the snow-covered roads. Sometimes, when the wind howls through the deserted stretches of Raynham Road and the snow blankets the landscape in silence, I catch a faint whisper on the breeze, a gentle echo of gratitude from a spirit finally at peace. It serves as a reminder that some mysteries are best faced with courage and compassion, and that the bonds we form with the unknown can bridge the gap between fear and understanding. And so, the legend of the faceless man on Raynham Road lives on, a haunting tale of loss, desperation, and the enduring power of empathy to bring solace to the restless souls that dwell in the shadows of the Bridgewater Triangle. Story number 4. Whispers Beneath the Ice. I've always been drawn to the enigmatic allure of Bridgewater Triangle, an area steeped in legends and unexplained phenomena. Nestled within its boundaries lies Hockomock Lake, a vast expanse of frozen water that transforms into a shimmering mirror each winter. It was December 1976 when a group of us, 5 friends bound by a shared love for adventure and the thrill of the unknown, decided to spend a cold Saturday night ice skating on its surface. Little did we know, that night would etch itself into our memories as a testament to the thin veil between the living and the supernatural. The day had been bitterly cold, the sky a dull gray that threatened to unleash more snow at any moment. We arrived at Hockomock Lake just as dusk began to settle, the fading light casting long shadows across the icy landscape. Bundled up in layers of clothing, we laced up our skates, the chill biting through the fabric and sinking into our bones. The lake was mostly empty, save for a few scattered ice fishermen and the distant hum of nocturnal wildlife. As we took to the ice, laughter and chatter filled the air, mingling with the crunch of our blades against the frozen surface. The serenity of the night was both comforting and exhilarating, the vastness of the lake stretching out before us like an untouched canvas. We circled the perimeter, performing tricks and racing each other, the thrill of the glide adding to the night's excitement. Around midnight, we decided to take a break, gathering near a small grove of trees that bordered the lake. The moon had risen, its silvery light reflecting off the ice, creating an ethereal glow that illuminated our faces. We huddled together, sipping hot cocoa from thermoses, the warmth a stark contrast to the icy air that surrounded us. "Isn't this perfect?" Mark, the unofficial leader of our group, said, his breath visible in the cold night air. "Just us, the lake, and the stars." Lisa, always the storyteller, began recounting local legends about the Bridgewater Triangle, her voice carrying the weight of mystery and intrigue. "They say that Hockomock Lake is haunted by restless spirits, lost souls who never found their way home. Some nights, people report seeing figures moving beneath the ice, or hearing whispers carried by the wind." We chuckled, dismissing her tales as mere folklore meant to add a touch of spookiness to our outing. Little did we know, the night had other plans for us. As the clock struck midnight, an unsettling silence enveloped the lake. The usual sounds of nocturnal creatures had faded, replaced by an eerie stillness that sent shivers down our spines. Mark suggested we skate towards the center of the lake, seeking a more open area to perform some daring maneuvers. Reluctantly, we agreed, pushing ourselves further from the safety of the shoreline. The ice beneath our feet felt solid, despite the increasing sense of unease that settled over us. The moonlight continued to cast its ghostly glow, reflecting off the ice in a way that made the surface appear almost liquid. That's when we heard it, a faint, guttural moaning emanating from beneath the ice. At first, we thought it was the wind, or perhaps an animal trapped beneath the surface. But the sound grew louder, more distinct, sending a collective chill through our bodies. "Did you hear that?" Emma, the youngest of our group, whispered, her voice trembling. Mark nodded, his eyes scanning the dark expanse of the lake. "Probably just some trapped animal. Let's not worry about it." But as we continued skating, the moaning persisted, interspersed with what sounded like desperate pleas. The atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick with an unspoken tension that made every breath feel labored. Suddenly, Emma screamed, her skates catching on a patch of thin ice that sent her sprawling onto the surface. We rushed to her side, our laughter and chatter replaced by genuine concern. "Are you okay?" I asked, helping her to her feet. She nodded shakily, rubbing her wrist where she had scraped her skin. "I think so, but what was that sound?" It felt wrong. Before Mark could respond, a shadowy figure began to emerge from the center of the lake. It was a woman, clad in a flowing white gown that contrasted sharply against the dark ice. Her form was translucent, almost ethereal, and as she rose, her face became visible, pallid and sorrowful, eyes hollow with an endless sadness. We stood frozen, the gravity of the situation sinking in as the figure moved closer. Her movements slow and deliberate. The moaning from beneath the ice seemed to intensify, blending with the woman's soft cries for help. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Mark, ever the brave one, took a step forward. "Who are you? What do you want?" The woman extended a hand towards us, her fingers trembling. "I'm lost. I can't find my way back." Emma, still recovering from her fall, stepped back, her fear palpable. "We should go, Mark. This isn't safe." But Mark hesitated, torn between his desire to help and the growing sense of dread that surrounded us. "We need to do something. She looks like she needs help." As Mark moved closer, the ice beneath our feet began to crack, tiny fissures spreading rapidly across the surface. Panic erupted within us as we realized the peril we were in. The moaning turned into screams, echoing through the night as the woman's figure began to dissolve into the icy air. "We have to get off the ice. Now!" I shouted, grabbing Mark's arm and pulling him back towards the shore. But it was too late. The ice gave way beneath us, plunging us into the frigid water below. We struggled to reach the surface, the cold seeping into our bodies, numbing our limbs and stealing our strength. The screams of the woman and the tortured moans from beneath the ice surrounded us, a cacophony of anguish that threatened to drive us mad. Miraculously, we managed to claw our way back to the surface, gasping for air as we swam towards the shore. Exhausted and shivering, we made it back to solid ground, collapsing onto the snow-covered bank in a heap of relief and terror. As we lay there, catching our breath, the woman's voice echoed one final time, a whisper carried by the wind. "Remember us." We sat in stunned silence, the weight of what had transpired settling over us like the lingering snow. The night had revealed the truth behind the legends, exposing the sorrow and unrest that lingered beneath the surface of Hockomock Lake. In the aftermath of that night, our lives changed in ways we couldn't have imagined. Mark, still grappling with the guilt of our near-tragic encounter, decided to leave the police force, unable to shake the memories of the haunting cries and the sorrowful figure that had almost claimed our lives. Emma, forever scarred by the experience, developed a deep-seated fear of water and the unknown. Lisa and I, though determined to move forward, found ourselves haunted by the echoes of that night, the whispers of lost souls that lingered in our dreams. The mystery of Hockomock Lake remains unresolved, the spirits of the past forever entwined with the present. We've tried to forget, to bury the memories deep within, but the calls of the lost echo through our minds, a constant reminder of the thin line between reality and the supernatural. Sometimes, during the coldest nights of winter, I find myself staring out into the frozen expanse of Hockomock Lake, the moonlight reflecting off the ice like the ghostly glow of that December night. I hear the whispers on the wind, the sorrowful cries that reach out to me from beyond the veil, urging me to remember, to honor the lost souls that still wander the icy waters. And so, the legend of the woman in white lives on, a haunting tale of sorrow and loss that serves as a chilling reminder of the mysteries that lie beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered by those brave or foolish enough to seek them out. Story number 5. Echoes of Taunton Tower. I've always been fascinated by the legends that surround old landmarks, the stories that give life to stone and steel. Taunton Stone Tower was one such place, a towering sentinel overlooking the small town of Bridgewater, standing tall against the ravages of time. Its history was rich, filled with tales of bravery, tragedy, and something far more sinister that locals whispered about in hushed tones. It was December 1990 when I decided to uncover the truth behind the ghostly apparitions that had become the subject of countless rumors. My name is David Mercer, and I've spent most of my adult life chasing stories, paranormal phenomena, unexplained mysteries, anything that could give a glimpse into the unknown. When I heard about the ghost of a woman in a white dress haunting Taunton Tower, I knew I had to investigate. The story was simple enough. A couple had reported seeing the apparition one cold December night, the ghost emitting a chilling laugh that echoed through the night air. Intrigued, I booked a flight to Bridgewater, eager to experience the eerie ambience of the tower firsthand. The town was quaint, nestled between dense forests and rolling hills, its streets quiet under a thick blanket of snow. As I approached Taunton Tower, the first thing that struck me was its imposing presence. The stone structure loomed against the night sky, its windows dark and foreboding. The locals had warned me about venturing too close after dark, but I was determined to see it for myself. I arrived on a frigid December evening, the air crisp and biting. The sky was a deep indigo, studded with stars that seemed to twinkle with secrets. I checked into the small inn at the edge of town, a cozy establishment run by Mrs. Caldwell, an elderly woman with a wealth of knowledge about the tower's history. "You're not the first to come seeking answers," she said, her eyes twinkling with a mix of caution and curiosity. "Taunton Tower has a way of keeping its stories alive." I nodded, thanking her for the warning. That night, I decided to visit the tower, armed with my camera, recording equipment, and a notebook to jot down any observations. The path to the tower was narrow, winding through the dense forest where the trees seemed to whisper secrets of their own. The snow muffled my footsteps, creating an almost surreal silence that enveloped me. As I approached the base of the tower, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The structure was even more imposing up close, its stone walls etched with the passage of time. I set up my equipment near the entrance, the moonlight casting long shadows that danced across the ground. The air was thick with anticipation, the only sounds the distant hoot of an owl and the soft rustling of the trees. I waited patiently, hours passing in what felt like mere moments. Just as I was about to lose hope, the temperature dropped noticeably, the air growing colder with each passing second. My breath became visible, forming misty puffs in the frigid night air. That's when I heard it, a soft, haunting laughter that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the tower. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The laughter was distant yet unmistakably present, echoing through the silent night. I grabbed my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness as I scanned the area. There, atop the tower, a figure stood, a woman in a flowing white dress, her silhouette stark against the night sky. She was beautiful, ethereal even, but there was something profoundly sorrowful in her stance. Her hair, long and loose, fluttered in the cold breeze, and her face was obscured by shadows, making her expression impossible to read. The laughter continued, now accompanied by a soft sobbing that seemed to pull at my very soul, summoning every ounce of courage. I began to ascend the narrow staircase inside the tower. Each step echoed ominously, the sound reverberating through the empty halls. As I climbed higher, the laughter grew louder, more insistent, blending with the cries of sorrow that filled the air. The walls seemed to close in around me, the oppressive atmosphere making it difficult to breathe. Reaching the top of the tower, I pushed open a heavy wooden door and stepped into a small, dimly lit room. The source of the laughter was clear now, a spectral figure standing by a large window, gazing out into the snowy landscape. She turned slowly, her movements graceful yet unnatural, and I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness emanating from her presence. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes, though hidden in shadow, seemed to bore into mine, filled with a pain that transcended the mortal realm. She extended a hand, her fingers delicate and cold, as if beckoning me closer. "Help me," she whispered, her voice a haunting melody that echoed through the room. "I can't find peace." I took a hesitant step forward, my heart aching with empathy. "What happened to you?" I asked, hoping to unravel the mystery that had drawn me to this forsaken tower. Tears glistened on her cheeks, the cold air freezing them before they could fall. "I was lost," she murmured, her voice breaking, "trapped in the storm. I couldn't find my way home. Now, I'm bound to this place, forever searching for solace." The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with the weight of her sorrow. I reached out, my hand trembling, but hesitated, unsure if I should touch the apparition that stood before me. "Is there something I can do to help you find peace?" I asked, desperate to ease her torment. She nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting a glimmer of hope. "Remember me," she whispered. "Honor my memory, and the storm will pass." Before I could respond, the temperature dropped even further, and the room was filled with a blinding white light. The laughter and sobbing intensified, swirling around me like a vortex of emotion. I felt myself being pulled into the very essence of her sorrow, the boundary between the living and the dead dissolving before my eyes. Images flashed before me, memories of a harsh winter night, the relentless storm that had trapped her, her desperate search for shelter, and the moment she succumbed to the unforgiving cold. The pain and fear were palpable, the essence of her existence etched into every fleeting vision. As the images faded, I found myself back in the room, the spectral woman now standing before me with a serene smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude and relief. "You've given me the peace I longed for." With those final words, she began to fade, her form dissolving into the ethereal light that filled the room. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a warm, comforting warmth that enveloped me. I felt a sense of accomplishment and peace wash over me. knowing that I had helped a restless spirit find her way to the other side. As dawn broke over Bridgewater, the first light of day illuminated Taunton Stone Tower, the stone walls reflecting the golden hues of the rising sun. I descended the staircase, the weight of the night's events settling comfortably around me. The tower no longer felt like a place of sorrow but a monument to the enduring power of compassion and understanding. Back at the inn, I shared my experience with Mrs. Caldwell, her eyes shining with a mixture of amazement and relief. "You've done something remarkable, David," she said softly. "The spirits of Taunton Tower can finally rest. Thanks to you." I nodded, a sense of fulfillment washing over me. The legends of Taunton Tower were no longer just stories. They were truths that had been acknowledged and respected. The ghostly apparitions that had once haunted the nights were now echoes of a past that had found its closure. Years have passed since that December night, but the memory of the woman in white and the haunting laughter still lingers in my mind. Taunton Stone Tower stands tall, its legacy now intertwined with the story of a restless spirit who found peace through understanding and empathy. But sometimes, on the coldest nights of winter, when the wind whispers through the trees and the snow blankets the landscape in silence, I catch a faint echo of laughter carried by the breeze, a gentle reminder that some stories never truly end, and that the bonds we form with the unknown can bridge the gap between life and death, offering solace to those who dwell in the shadows. Story number 6. Whispers on Black Crow Field. I've always been fascinated by the unexplained, the shadows that dance just beyond the edge of reason. Growing up near the Bridgewater Triangle, I was no stranger to the tales that circulated about this enigmatic region. But nothing prepared me for the night I witnessed the rituals on Black Crow Field, a night that would forever alter my understanding of the unknown. It was December 1998, a month when the landscape transformed under a blanket of snow, the cold seeping into every crevice of the earth. My friends and I decided to explore Black Crow Field, a secluded expanse on the outskirts of the Bridgewater Triangle. Locals spoke of strange occurrences there, especially during the long winter nights. But as someone who thrived on adventure and skepticism, I dismissed these stories as mere folklore meant to add a layer of mystery to our already vast wilderness. We arrived just as dusk began to settle, the sky painted with hues of purple and deep blue. The air was crisp, each breath a visible puff in the fading light. The field was eerily quiet, the snow-covered ground reflecting the last rays of the sun. Tall grasses, heavy with frost, swayed gently in the cold breeze, their movements almost hypnotic. "Let's set up here," Mark suggested, pointing to a cleared area near the center of the field. We unpacked our gear, the rustling of our backpacks and the clinking of metal being the only sounds breaking the silence. As night fell, we gathered around a small fire, its warmth a comforting contrast to the biting cold. We shared stories and laughed, the camaraderie easing the tension that came with being in such a remote place. But as the night deepened, an uneasy feeling began to settle over me, a sense that we weren't entirely alone. The darkness seemed to press in around us, the shadows growing longer and more pronounced. Around midnight, the temperature plummeted, the cold intensifying as if the very air was turning against us. That's when we heard it, a soft chanting, barely audible at first, carried by the wind. We exchanged uneasy glances, the sound sending chills down our spines. "Did you guys hear that?" Emma whispered, her voice trembling. Mark nodded, his expression serious. "Probably just the wind playing tricks on us. Let's not worry about it." But the chanting persisted, growing louder and more distinct. It was rhythmic, almost hypnotic, echoing through the vast expanse of Black Crow Field. The flames of our fire flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows that danced among the grasses. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Figures cloaked in black emerged from the darkness, their faces obscured by hoods. They moved with purpose, forming a circle around a makeshift altar at the center of the field. The sight sent a surge of adrenaline through me. my skepticism wavering as fear took hold. "We need to see what they're doing," Mark said, determination etched on his face. I hesitated, but the curiosity and the undeniable tension compelled me forward. We approached the gathering cautiously, the snow crunching under our boots. As we drew closer, the chanting became clearer, the words indistinct but filled with an unearthly fervor. At the center of the circle stood a tall figure, his hands raised towards the sky. The firelight glinted off his ceremonial dagger, casting sharp reflections that danced across his face. Around him, the others joined in, their voices melding into a haunting melody that seemed to reverberate through the very ground beneath us. I felt a presence, a weight pressing down on my chest as the ritual reached its climax. The air grew thick with anticipation, the energy palpable, and then, without warning, the figure lowered his arms and turned towards us, his eyes glowing a fierce red that pierced the darkness. "Leave now," he commanded, his voice both authoritative and chilling. "This is not your place." Panic surged through me as the realization hit. These were no ordinary people. There was something primal, something ancient about them, a force that commanded respect and fear in equal measure. "We didn't mean any harm," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're just passing through." The figure took a step forward, the others halting their chanting as if sensing the confrontation. "This field is sacred," he declared. "You must respect our space." Before I could respond, a gust of wind swept through the field, extinguishing our fire in an instant. The sudden darkness was suffocating, the only light coming from the red eyes that now glowed ominously in the darkness. "Why are you performing these rituals?" Mark demanded, his bravado faltering. The figure's gaze bore into me, his expression unreadable. "To honor the spirits," he replied simply. "To maintain the balance." I felt a shiver run down my spine, the gravity of the situation settling in. This was no mere ritual, it was a connection to something beyond our understanding, a bridge between the living and the dead. As we stood there, frozen in place, the snow began to fall harder, the flakes thickening into a blinding white. The figures in black closed in around us, their presence overwhelming. The chanting resumed, louder and more intense, the words now clear as they echoed through the night. "Spirits of the field, guide us in our path. Protect us from those who seek to disrupt the sacred balance." The air crackled with energy, the very fabric of reality seeming to warp around us. I could feel the spirits, their presence tangible, their whispers brushing against my consciousness. The fear that had once held me captive now mingled with a profound sense of awe. Suddenly, the chanting ceased, the figures lowering their heads in a gesture of respect. The tension in the air dissipated, replaced by a serene calmness that enveloped the field. The red eyes dimmed, their glow fading into the darkness as if satisfied with our presence. "We should go," Mark said quietly, the urgency returning. "Now." We turned to leave, the snow now falling gently, the night air filled with the lingering echoes of the ritual. As we made our way back to our camp, the unease gave way to a sense of reverence, a newfound respect for the mysteries that lay hidden within Black Crow Field. The next morning, the sun rose to reveal a pristine landscape, the snow sparkling under its warm rays. The memories of that night remained etched in my mind, a reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. We packed up our gear in silence, the experience binding us in ways words could never capture. In the weeks that followed, the events on Black Crow Field became a topic of hushed conversations among locals and curious outsiders alike. Some dismissed it as a prank or a group of thrill-seekers, while others believed it to be a genuine connection to the spiritual realm. For me, the truth lay somewhere in between, a fragile balance of skepticism and belief, a testament to the enduring mysteries of the Bridgewater Triangle. But sometimes, on particularly cold nights in December, when the wind howls through the barren trees and the snow blankets the earth in silence, I find myself staring out into the distance, the memories of Black Crow Field resurfacing like ghosts in the night. The whispers of the spirits linger in my mind, a gentle reminder that some places hold secrets too profound to be unraveled, and that the line between reality and the supernatural is thinner than we ever imagined. And so, the legend of Black Crow Field lives on, a haunting tale of rituals and restless spirits, a story that continues to captivate and terrify those who dare to venture into the heart of the Nevada Triangle. Story number 7. Whispers Among the Ferns. I've always been drawn to the solitude that the wilderness offers. There's something profoundly liberating about being alone with nature, away from the chaos and noise of everyday life. So, in December 1983, when the opportunity arose to spend a few weeks hunting in the Bridgewater forest, I didn't hesitate. Little did I know, that decision would lead me into a nightmare I still can't fully comprehend. The Bridgewater Forest, nestled within the Nevada Triangle, was notorious for its dense foliage and eerie reputation. Locals often spoke in hushed tones about the unexplained phenomena and the strange disappearances that occurred within its borders. As a seasoned hunter, I was no stranger to challenging terrains, but the legends surrounding Bridgewater intrigued me rather than deterred me. I arrived on a chilly December morning, the ground blanketed in a thick layer of snow that muffled the usual sounds of wildlife. The forest stood silent, the towering trees casting long shadows that danced with the flickering light of my lantern. My target was elusive, a deer that had been spotted frequently but remained untraceable, adding to the mystery of the area. Setting up camp near a small clearing, I unpacked my gear and prepared for what I anticipated to be a tranquil hunting expedition. The first few days passed without incident. I tracked deer, admired the stark beauty of the snow-covered landscape, and reveled in the peace that only nature can provide. But as the days turned into nights, an unsettling feeling began to creep into my thoughts. It was on the 4th night that everything changed. I had ventured deeper into the forest than usual, following fresh tracks that suggested a large animal had passed through recently. The moon was a thin crescent, barely illuminating the path ahead. My breath formed visible puffs in the cold air as I moved cautiously, the crunch of snow under my boots the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. As I navigated through a dense thicket of ferns, a sudden rustling caught my attention. My heart quickened, and I steadied my rifle, eyes scanning the darkness. That's when I saw it, a figure standing a few meters away, partially concealed by the thick foliage. It was tall, easily 2 meters in height, with eyes that glowed a menacing red, piercing through the shadows like embers in the night. I froze, unable to move, as the creature emitted a series of guttural howls that reverberated through the forest. The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard, deep, sorrowful, and filled with an inexplicable rage. My instincts screamed at me to flee, but my body betrayed me, rooted to the spot by sheer terror. The creature remained still for a moment, its red eyes locked onto mine, before it began to move. Each step was deliberate and unnaturally silent, except for the occasional snapping of branches under its immense weight. I knew I had to act, but fear paralyzed me, making every second feel like an eternity. Gathering every ounce of courage, I aimed my rifle, but before I could take a shot, the creature disappeared. One moment it was there, and the next, it was gone, leaving behind only the echo of its howls fading into the night. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline surging through my veins. Without looking back, I sprinted back to my camp, the oppressive silence of the forest amplifying my every step. The rest of the night was a blur of restless sleep, punctuated by the lingering fear of what I had encountered. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize the experience. Perhaps it was a bear, or some other large predator that had eluded me, but the memory of those glowing red eyes and the haunting howls refused to fade, gnawing at my sanity with each passing night. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved into local archives and spoke with the few inhabitants of nearby towns. What I discovered was chilling. A series of reports dating back decades about sightings of a similar creature in the Bridgewater forest. Descriptions varied, but the common thread was a towering figure with glowing eyes and an otherworldly presence. Some even claimed that the creature was the restless spirit of a miner who had perished in a tragic snowstorm years ago, his soul forever bound to the forest he once worked. The stories were dismissed by most as mere folklore, tales spun to add an air of mystery to the already enigmatic forest. But my encounter left me with no choice but to believe there was something more sinister at play, a presence that defied explanation and haunted the very heart of Bridgewater. On the seventh night, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I decided to confront the unknown. Equipped with additional gear and a resolve forged from sleepless nights, I ventured back into the depths of the forest, following the same path that had led to my terrifying encounter. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, the only light coming from my lantern and the dim glow of my flashlight. As I moved through the ferns, the air grew colder, the silence more oppressive. Every rustle and snap of a twig heightened my anxiety, my senses on high alert. Suddenly, the howls began again, this time louder and closer, echoing through the trees like a mournful lament. My heart raced as I scanned the area, searching for any sign of the creature. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a fleeting shadow that seemed to merge with the darkness. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the night, but there was nothing there. The tension was unbearable, each step forward filled with dread and anticipation. And then, there it was, the creature, standing once more in the midst of the ferns, its red eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to pierce my very soul. This time, it didn't disappear. Instead, it began to move towards me, the ground beneath its feet seemingly untouched by the snow. The howls grew louder, a cacophony of anguish and rage that filled the night air. I raised my rifle, hands trembling, but before I could take a shot, the creature stopped, tilted its head, eyes never leaving mine, as if trying to communicate something beyond human understanding. The air around us seemed to vibrate with an unseen energy, the very essence of the forest responding to its presence. In that moment, a vision flashed before my eyes. A miner, trapped in a blizzard, his face contorted with fear and desperation. The howls turned into cries for help, a haunting plea that resonated deep within me. I realized then that the creature was not merely a predator but a tormented soul, forever reliving the tragedy that had consumed him. Tears welled up in my eyes as empathy replaced fear. I lowered my rifle, taking a step forward. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I didn't know." The creature watched me, its red eyes softening, the rage and sorrow melting into a profound sadness. Slowly, it began to fade, the howls turning into a gentle whisper carried by the wind. As the last traces of its presence dissipated, the oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a serene stillness that enveloped the forest. Exhausted and emotionally drained, I made my way back to camp, the weight of what I had experienced settling heavily on my shoulders. The encounter had changed me, instilling a deep respect for the mysteries that lay hidden within the wilderness. I knew that the Bridgewater Forest held secrets that were beyond my understanding, spirits that sought closure and peace. In the days that followed, the fear that had once gripped me transformed into a sense of responsibility. I felt compelled to honor the memory of the restless soul I had encountered, to share his story and perhaps help others find peace within the enigmatic depths of the forest. The Bridgewater Forest remained as silent and mysterious as ever, its towering ferns concealing countless untold stories. But for me, the whispers among the ferns would forever echo in my mind, a haunting reminder of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead, and the enduring power of compassion to bridge the gap between two worlds.